Hello, powerful people. Welcome back to the Power at Work blog. I'm Seth Harris. I'm a senior fellow at the Burn Center for Social Change. So delighted to have you back here. And we've got I think, a really fascinating and I think you might find troubling blogcast for you today. Today, the day you're watching this, it's July 27th, which is National Whistleblower Day. To try to draw attention to the efforts by whistleblowers around the country and their attorneys and advocates, like some of those you're going to meet today, to shine a light on this important issue of worker power in our society. Whistleblowing is very much a story about worker power. It's about workers' ability to call on the government to intervene when an employer uses their power to silence them, often when the worker is trying to disclose illegal or unethical or irresponsible, unsafe behavior. So it's a story of worker voice in the workplace when workers are trying to disclose information that you and I as citizens want to have disclosed. Now, I want to acknowledge that that's a little bit different from what we typically do on this blog. We're very much focused on worker power through collective action, often through unions. This is a different story. This is workers calling on the power of the government to intervene, to give them power when an employer is taking action against them. Sometimes a government employer, sometimes a private sector employer. You know, that we talk about being a nation of laws. This is one of those areas where, as a nation of laws and a society that's committed to fairness, we really need to ensure that workers have the power that they need in order to be able to protect themselves when they face retaliation from an employer. So we think today's blogcast is really, really, really important. Even though it's from a somewhat different perspective. So let me tell you a little bit about the terrific people that you're going to meet today, the courageous people that you're going to meet today, including two alums of Northeastern University's School of Law. We're always delighted to lift up the terrific work of our colleagues at Northeastern. You all have met, those of you who are regular viewers of these blogcasts have met Alicia Modestino, who's just a fantastic professor of economics at Northeastern. If you're a reader of the blog, you've read the work of Professor Kimberly Lucas from the Public Policy School. She wrote about retirement savings for early educators, another terrific progressive attorney, a progressive academic, not attorney, academic. Not everybody has to be an attorney, even though a lot of the people you're going to meet today are. She wrote about this important issue of how to improve early education for kids by improving retirement savings for early educators. So go read Kim's post. Watch Alicia lead our discussion for the first Friday in August, which we call Numbers Day. It's when the Bureau of Labor Statistics releases its jobs unemployment and wages report, and we comment on it. You're going to miss me in the next one. I'll be vacationing with my family. But today's guests are every bit as impressive, and a couple of them are Northeastern alums. You'll meet Siri Nelson, who is the executive director of the National Whistleblower Center and an adjunct professor at Northeastern University School of Law, teaching whistleblowing law. She was an associate attorney and policy counsel at Kohn, and Calapinto, which is the nation's leading whistleblower law firm. And she worked closely with all kinds of whistleblowers and legislators and regulators. And she's been published in a number of places. And she's now an editor and legislative correspondent at Whistleblower Network News. You'll meet Steve Kohn, one of the Kohns in Kohn and Calapinto. Steve is one of the nation's really top whistleblower attorneys. He's a founding director of the National Whistleblower Center. He's written 8 books on whistleblowing law, and he is still practicing whistleblower law. He's chairman of the board of the National Whistleblower Center. You'll meet Dr. Toni Savage, who is a whistleblower. She's going to tell her story, and I think, as I said at the top, you're going to find it disturbing. She was a contracting officer for the Army Corps of Engineers in Huntsville, Alabama. She had always won accolades for her integrity and her outstanding job performance. And then she reported on a pattern and practice of illegal contracting behavior. And boy, did the bricks come tumbling down on her head. Her situation changed for the worse. And she ended up in a protracted battle over her whistleblower status. And we have Jane Turner, who also is a whistleblower, worked for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, actually was a whistleblower twice. So courageous. She blew the whistle on some irresponsible and in some cases unethical and illegal practices within the FBI regarding a program that she was running in North Dakota with some Indian tribes. And, folks taking advantage of some deeply disadvantaged folks, children in some cases. And Jane blew the whistle on them. And again, faced unbelievable retaliation, basically had all of her job responsibilities taken away. You'll hear her story. You don't need me to tell you the story. And then she blew the whistle again. She was involved in an investigation around the events surrounding 9/11, the terrorist attacks of 9/11, where people were stealing property, private property, and evidence from the 9/11 site at Ground Zero in New York City, 8 blocks from where I used to teach law. And again, she suffered unbelievable retaliation and ultimately had to retire. So you'll hear their stories. We recorded those interviews on Monday, July 24th. I'm talking to you Wednesday morning, Wednesday, July 26th. Tomorrow, the 27th, when you're going to be watching this, is National Whistleblower Day. But I did want to comment on some breaking labor news. It actually broke yesterday. It's not breaking right now, but important labor news. And that is that the Teamsters and the United Parcel Service, UPS, have a tentative agreement. There was talk for a long time about there being a strike. They were very hard negotiations. The parties were battling over things like a two-tiered employment system, the hated 22-4 two-tiered employment system where newer workers got lesser benefits and lesser wages than longer tenured workers, about issues like forced overtime, workers being exposed to heat hazards, and also, wage and pension issues, always an important issue, the money issues, the economic issues. And yesterday, the Teamsters and UPS announced that they had a tentative agreement. Now, that agreement has to be ratified by the Teamsters UPS membership. There's 325, 330, 340,000 of them, so it may take a little while. But let me just say, this is another piece of evidence that collective bargaining works. And most importantly, that union representation works. You don't even have to ask yourself very hard or question yourself very hard about would the workers at UPS be getting the things that they are getting out of this collective bargaining agreement if they didn't have a union. The answer is definitely not. The Teamsters representation and aggressive bargaining tactics, and let me say some, I thought, creative tactics like practice picketing, practice striking, getting ready in the event that they were not able to reach an agreement with UPS, and doing that in a very, very public, high-profile way, and getting statements of support from politicians and other unions, and it was very effective stuff. And now they have a tentative agreement. Now, I have seen on social media that there is some unhappiness among some particularly part-time members of the Teamsters at UPS, or part-time UPS workers who are members of the Teamsters. They were hoping for a bigger pay increase, I believe, is one of the concerns. But I don't want to speak for them. I'll let them speak for themselves. My bet is that the agreement will be ratified because the Teamsters just made an immense amount of progress. I mean, they dealt with some issues that have been knotty, or as they say in Northeastern University's hometown of Boston, wicked problems for a long time. There was real unhappiness among the membership with respect to that two-tiered system, but also with respect to wages. And, imagine driving around Phoenix, Arizona in summer in an unair conditioned vehicle, right? Imagine driving around Miami, Florida in an unair conditioned vehicle in August. Must that be like? South Texas, what must that be like? And now they're going to get air conditioning, and there'll be interim measures taken until they can get trucks that have air conditioning in them. That is a meaningful improvement in the quality of those workers' lives, achieved at the bargaining table, achieved because they had a union, and it was a strategic and very aggressive union at that. Collective bargaining works. Union representation works. And we've had evidence of that throughout. Now, are there strikes? Of course there are strikes. That doesn't mean collective bargaining has failed. Sometimes the parties have to use economic weapons to change the other guy's mind, right? Sometimes they have to lean on you to get you to change your position. And sometimes they lean on you and you don't change your position, and they have to change their position. Sometimes members are really, really angry, and then they strike and they realize maybe they weren't that angry and they want to go for the deal that was on the table, or maybe a little bit better. There's lots and lots of permutations, but a strike is not a failure. A strike is part of the process. It's not pretty, but democracy is not always pretty. And this is workplace democracy. So I've been talking to the media a lot about this lately, talking to reporters, talking on television about these issues. Some of those clips, all the television clips, are available on the Power at Work blog. I encourage you to take a look at those. But that's a very, very big piece of news that the UPS and the Teamsters have cut a deal. So I'm going to stop talking about other stuff, and I really, really want you to hear this Whistleblowers blogcast. It's so important. So you're going to hear from Siri Nelson, Steve Kohn, Toni Savage, and Jane Turner for National Whistleblowers Day. Enjoy it. So let me start by saying thank you to all of you for joining today, and I guess happy National Whistleblower Day. Is it a happy day? I think it is, at least for the people who are participating today. So Steve, I want to start with you because you've dedicated your life to the service of whistleblowers. But I think you and I are roughly contemporaries, and I don't mean to call you old by saying that, but when I attended law school, there was no course in whistleblower law. And I don't know if you had the same experience. So how and why did you get involved in whistleblower law? What was it that attracted you to it, and how did you even find out about it?
Well, it's funny you say that, but in 1982, I did my first co-op at Northeastern and at a legal program, and they said I was going to represent and help whistleblowers. And my comment was, "What's that?" And then ever since, that's what I've been doing my entire legal career. But in the old days, there were no good whistleblower laws. What I do today does not resemble what occurred 30, 40 years ago. I don't use any of the same laws. Things have developed, and they've really developed in a way that whistleblowing has grown, and it's tremendously rewarding. So you say, well, why did I stick with it? Number one are the clients. Whatever the stereotypes are, they're wrong. They're the most loyal, the smartest, the most incredible people I've had the honor to meet. I think back to it all the time, the whistleblowers I've been able to represent. Some people like to portray them as disgruntled or whatever. It's just absolutely not true. You're looking at people who are ethical, who do the right thing, and you really want them on your team. So that's number one. Number two is I do like creative things, and we were able to build the law out. Work with Congress, work with agencies, work with the courts, fight like hell to get better laws enacted. So where else can you do that? Where else can you sit and engage to help people who are really contributing to society in major ways? I mean, this is just turned out to be just an incredible journey.
So, Siri, what about you? You're also a Northeastern Law School alum. Maybe Steve, I don't know, but maybe Steve was your professor, but you also have dedicated your career to whistleblower law. What was it that attracted you to working in this field?
Yeah, I'm a Northeastern School of Law alum, class of 2019. Hello, everyone. And I was able to take Stephen Cohn's class, Whistleblower Law, which I now teach with him as an adjunct professor. So that's a really fun and creative experience. We definitely give the students a run for their money in that course. And what attracted me to the subject matter was seeking an avenue for individuals to take action and hold corporations accountable. And that's really what keeps me in this area. When I see the courageous individuals who are standing up against these huge machines, whether they're the government or in the private sector all around the world. And so, working with Steve, we definitely get to spread that message. So, I love it.
I love that image of standing up with your clients against big entities, big corporate entities, particularly, and speaking truth to power. I love that image of whistleblowing law. So, Steve, I want to pick up on something else that you said. So, back when I was the Deputy Secretary of Labor, I oversaw the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which, as you know, over time has also become the whistleblower enforcement organization inside the federal government. There, when I was there, and I don't know what the number is now, but the number when I was there was something like 22 whistleblower laws were assigned to OSHA for enforcement purposes, not merely the OSH Act, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, but Sarbanes-Oxley and the railroad whistleblower law. I mean, just a long, long list of laws. And my sense is that I always felt that OSHA had gotten stuck with this gigantic, complex, multi-statute task, and that they really struggled to keep up with it. And so you talked about how the law has developed. Has it developed for the better? And what does the whistleblower bar have a handle on this proliferation of laws in this area?
Well, first off, the whistleblower bar, be it that it is, does not. As you said, there's many laws, many procedures, and a lot of law firms and even labor lawyers might do one or two cases. But for those law firms to have an expertise across the board is like maybe two firms that in the whole country that could conquer that. It's funny you mentioned that your role in OSHA, but it actually goes all the way back to the 80s when the best corporate whistleblower law was the Atomic Energy Act, and it wasn't that good. But the judges were getting receptive at the Office of Administrative Law Judges. The investigators, be it from First Wage and Hour, then OSHA, were becoming interested in the cases, and they were developing an expertise. Whereas if you went to federal court, they often never heard of a whistleblower, would have one case. Where these judges were developing an expertise and also giving us the time to present a case. Like, for example, in one case, the judge gave us 3 weeks just to present our damages. I mean, no federal judge is going to do that. It's like very unheard of. So, as we amended different laws, we recommended to Congress to stick it with the Department of Labor. So that's why you got so many, because labor just did a better job than others. And then in terms of the statutes, it started with a 30-day statute of limitations. Now they all have at least 180 days. They started with no right to federal court. Now all the new laws let you either do labor or go into federal court. They changed the burdens of proof to make them more favorable to employees. So the whistleblower laws are years ahead of the OSHA retaliation law, which is considered backwards and absolutely unworkable. Because the whistleblower laws let you get into court, private right of action, decent damages, and a good burden. So that's how they developed on the retaliation side. But the big development was whistleblower rewards, getting a monetary reward. And just very briefly, that shifts the case from how much did you suffer? The more you suffer, the more the Department of Labor will award you.
Hmm.
To how good is your evidence? can you find the white collar crooks guilty? And the better your evidence, the bigger the prosecution, the better your reward. And now you can obtain compensation even if you never suffer any retaliation.
So Siri, help us to understand sort of the typical or basic whistleblower case. Help us to understand, if the people that you're advocating for, the people that Stephen is representing, that you represented, what kind of circumstances do they find themselves in? We're going to hear from Jane and Toni in just a second about their particular circumstances, but give us the basics of a whistleblower case. Why does someone come to a lawyer and say, gosh, I need help?
Yeah, I just want to start by saying that, Jane Turner and Toni Savage are exemplary whistleblowers. So what you're going to hear from them is definitely a higher standard than what the standard whistleblower case looks like. And some of the things that really differentiate these two incredible people from other whistleblowers is their attention to detail, the quality of evidence they've been able to provide in their whistleblower cases, their credibility, and their ability to communicate effectively with the enforcement agents that they've worked with and bringing their case forward. And also, finding great counsel. So the typical whistleblower is stressed out, is afraid, might not have evidence, might be afraid of collecting evidence, but believes that something's wrong at their workplace, has a feeling that someone is up to no good, and may have observed things that give root to that feeling. The typical whistleblower has no idea where to start and may go to their local attorney, divorce attorney, personal injury attorney, just anybody who they think might help. They may go to the media, or they may go to their friends. Oftentimes, they'll go to their supervisor and get retaliated against before anybody hears about their claims. And the path forward for them is very confusing. So that's the typical whistleblower. And that is why National Whistleblower Center does what we do. We try to create a clearer path for the typical whistleblower to figure out how to get counsel, what to consider when they're thinking about blowing the whistle because they've seen something concerning, and what rights are available to them, even if they don't feel comfortable reaching out to an attorney.
And what is it that the whistleblower is seeking? Right. So is it that they have faced some kind of retaliation for the information they brought forward? Or are they seeking monetary damages? Are they seeking to punish somebody? When they're going to the court, what is the relief that they want?
Well, whistleblowers are seeking justice, and they're usually seeking public protection. So the most ardent whistleblowers are those that see activity that is of concern to public health and well-being and are trying to report. They genuinely believe that it's worth the sacrifice of their well-being and their everyday sanity to speak up about this. So whether it be a financial sort of misconduct that's depriving people of their fair shake in business, whether it be a health or safety concern, like the Nuclear Regulatory Commission concerns that NWC started off with, or be an environmental concern, a public safety and national security concern. So, these are people who really think that whatever it is that they have to speak up about is worth losing everything for. And there's a huge, huge misconception about self-interest, having a vendetta, or any other alternative motivations, which is driven by those who are likely to be blown the whistle on in order to preemptively silence anyone who would have the courage to speak up. These are people who are doing things for the exact right reason, and that's why they deserve to be protected and rewarded.
Great. And Stephen,
I just want to interject that for a second. I've represented whistleblowers for about 40 years. I've never had one case where the primary or even a motive of the whistleblower was like revenge or to get even. They all start with some form of serious concern, financial, health and safety, etc. And those stereotypes are just wrong.
Well, so let me, you know what? I see Jane is nodding her head, and so we have actual whistleblowers here with us. So you've talked about it, Stephen. You and Siri have talked about it at sort of a high level, a little bit abstract. That was the question that I asked. So let's get into some specifics. So Jane, let me start with you, or should I say, Agent Turner? Let's start with you. You're an agent with the FBI, and you have blown the whistle on the FBI at least twice. Maybe you've done it more than that. I'm aware of two times. One was a case in North Dakota involving a program that you ran with tribes up there that was focused on women and children. So I'd like you to tell us a little bit about that. But also, you were involved in a 9/11 case, which is very close to my heart. I was actually down in that neighborhood on that horrible, horrible, horrible day. I was eight blocks away. So that really resonates with me. So take us through the facts of what happened in the North Dakota case, and then take us through the facts of what happened in the 9/11 case in as much detail as you think we need to know in order to understand the story and why you became a whistleblower.
Seth, it's a very interesting journey. And of course, like you said, I was a senior resident agent for the FBI up in North Dakota. I was considered an expert in crimes against children, taught at a national level. And to give you the Reader's Digest excerpt of this case, I had fellow agents who were covering up crimes against children as car accidents. I brought it to the attention of the Minneapolis division, because I was an expert in the field, and who else but I could speak as to this awful thing that was taking place up there. We were not considering the clients that we were serving on the tribes, as you say. So I blew the whistle on that, went all the way up to headquarters in Washington, D.C., and all the way back down. And back then, 25 years ago, the stigma of being a whistleblower, there was terms thrown around like muckraker and snitch and rat, tattletale, leaker, skunk at the picnic, Senator Grassley's favorite expression. And of course, the Bureau enfolds their personnel, and the whole concept I was taught from the first day at the academy, FBI Academy, was protect the Bureau. When I blew the whistle, I obviously stepped outside that circle, and they made sure that I was put outside my tribe, the FBI. So 25 years ago, Stephen Kohn joined me on that journey because I had gone all the way up, all the way down. They had severely retaliated against me, told me I was coming down into the Minneapolis office in order to take over the whole crimes against children program, and it was a lie. Once I got down there, I didn't even have a desk, had no cases assigned. The things that happen to whistleblowers that are very common, such as mobbing, reducing your pay or hours of work, demoting you, unwarranted disciplinary action, denying a promotion, threats or intimidation, reassignment, denying work benefits. All of those, Seth, happened to me. Those are common across the spectrum. So it really caused for me moral and ethical dissonance. And I was very lucky I got Stephen Kohn, because he was able to help me figure out a journey to bring about justice. And that's what I was looking for. You say, what do whistleblowers look for? Absolutely correct. Justice. I wanted justice for those Indian children. I wanted justice for myself. And Stephen and I started this journey, thank God, along with Senator Grassley. And from that journey, I was involved down in Minneapolis and developed this massive case, even though I was never given any work. It was theft from ground zero. I found stolen stuff taken by Minneapolis contractors back to Minneapolis. I got the biggest case in the office, worked it up, and unfortunately, it turned out that our own FBI personnel had taken artifacts or relics. And I, of course, had done this huge case and knew the value of these artifacts and relics. And I remember talking to Stephen and saying, Stephen, what do I do? They've just started accepting me back into the fold as an agent because of this massive case. And this is a true moral quandary. And he said, what would you do if you found stolen evidence? I said, I'd tag it and bag it. He said, do it. And I did. We flew it back to Washington, D.C., and that started a massive case where they found stolen artifacts all over the United States, right up to the top.
Just to clarify, I just want to clarify, if you don't mind, Jane. You're talking about items that were taken from the scene of the terrorist attack on 9/11 at the World Trade Center that were taken by contractors who were working on the site and taken by FBI agents who were also working on the site, who had been brought in from Minneapolis, and they took it. What were they planning to do with it? Sell it?
Well, that's a good question. They did have a huge investigation and found stolen artifacts all over the United States. But the FBI agents, the one I found was sitting on a secretary's desk. Our evidence response team had gone back to New York and had returned with all these artifacts that I knew from my case were precious. And that globe that they brought back and sat on that secretary's desk belonged to a victim that was in one of the towers. So I knew that if somebody from our evidence response team would bring back a piece of evidence for a secretary, imagine what might have been stolen for a wife, a lover, a husband. You know, I just knew we had a terrible problem. And like I said, I told Stephen, you know, I've got the biggest case in the office. What do I do? And he said, you know, what would you do with stolen stuff? I said, tag it and bag it. And that's what he said, tag it and bag it. And I did. And we went back to Washington. And of course, my career was over. That was it. And of course, it was very tough for me. It took me 10 years to recover because of the moral injury.
When you say your career was over, what does that mean?
Well, the FBI immediately started termination proceedings and said, quote, she embarrassed the Bureau, unquote. And that's one thing you never do, embarrass the Bureau. And I was taught that from day one.
I'll bet Stephen. That's right. I'll bet that's right. Stephen wanted to jump in. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say a couple things. So in whistleblowing, the bigger the scandal you expose, the more retaliation you face. If the listeners think that, oh, you were really right, you shouldn't be retaliated against. It's the exact opposite. So in Jane's case, I saw the evidence. The case in North Dakota was shocking, how the FBI had turned their back on little children, 2-year-olds, who had been victimized by outrageous sexual assaults. And on the Indian reservations, the FBI had jurisdiction over those crimes. So you can imagine a bureaucracy faced with evidence that they are complicit, that they've turned their backs on these victims, when one person like Jane stands up and says, look what's happening here. It was a massive backlash of lies. And we fought that case for years. We had to take it to a jury trial. We had to take it to the Court of Appeals and get a reversal. They threw everything they had at Jane. The jury saw through it. The federal judge saw through it. It was a tremendous victory. But it's because she was right, and she had this incredible evidence. And then as we're fighting that, just so you understand, she's calling artifacts. This was stolen property. The investigation she triggered, which changed national policy and resulted in people being disciplined. But if you read the report, and I think, Seth, you'll understand this, people stole bloody T-shirts. They stole burned American flags. There were literally tons of materials taken around the country for people for their souvenirs. And whether they were going to sell it or what they're going to do with it, they clearly had converted it for personal use. That is theft. And then we learned there was this big conflict with the local authorities in New York who were revolted that because they wanted to return all this to the victims and to their
Sure.
families.
Of course they
So
did.
Jane
Of course
just
they did.
hit the double whammo. She
Yeah.
got him
So Jane,
twice. Very rare.
yeah. So Jane, so you won the North Dakota case, and that resulted in your being reinstated into the FBI. Were there any other implications, any other remedies in that case?
So in the North Dakota case, they hadn't fired her. They just removed all her job duties.
I
So
see.
Yes.
she
I
was
see.
given damages. The jury awarded more than the maximum amount permitted under law.
Hmm.
And so it was reduced to, I think, about 300,000, which under law was the most she could get for the loss of her reputation, emotional distress. In the Globe case, it started as wrongful discharge. But by the time the case ended, which was like 10 years later, she had retired. So they cleaned up the record. They gave her some damages, but it literally, and this is also terrible with some of these retaliation cases, they literally go on for years and years because the companies or the agencies have so much money to just keep pouring. And believe me, Jane was public enemy number one. They never apologized to her, even though she was absolutely right on 2 occasions.
That's correct. The Bureau was very, very upset, as I was, considering the fact we had executives from FBI headquarters who came into court and perjured themselves. I was so astounded. And I said to Stephen, go after him. Go after him. FBI agents can't lie on the stand. They just can't. And of course, we had bigger fish to fry. But they also instated a policy after our whistleblowing that you can't steal things from crime scenes.
That was a
I said,
no-brainer.
wait a second.
Can I just say how astonishing
Yeah.
that you need to have a policy saying you can't steal things from crime scenes. That is astonishing, and that's an amazing outcome, a successful outcome of your case. I want to.
Whistleblowing.
Toni has been amazingly patient with us, and she's got a compelling story that she wants to tell us, and
Yes.
I'm eager to hear it. Toni, I'm going to turn your microphone back on. I had turned you off because there was a little bit of a reverb, so let me bring you into the conversation. So you were a contracting officer with the Army Corps of Engineers in Huntsville, Alabama. And let me just say, having overseen a very, very large procurement operation, they're risky operations. There's risk of theft, there's risk of dishonesty, there's risk of corruption, both in the contract making process, the contract appeals process, application process. There's risk because there's such a gigantic amount of money involved, and that must have been especially so at the Army Corps. So tell us a little bit about what you found, and then tell us a little bit about how you went through the thought process of deciding that you were going to become a whistleblower.
So first of all, thank you for having me. It's just as Stephen said, you don't start this journey thinking I'm going to be a whistleblower. For me, I was a contracting officer. I had taken an oath as a civil servant and as a contracting officer. So therefore, I was just doing my job. I was a steward over the taxpayers' dollars. And as you said, even with you saying your connection to 9/11, of course, there were multiple contractors, so many people, as you just stated, with kickbacks, contracts that were awarded. We could see that just in the news, the infamous expensive hammer and toilets that were in the news. And so for me, I started with the Corps of Engineers out of high school as a high school student doing a summer job in Memphis, Tennessee. That's where I'm from, originally a native of. Got a job as a college student, worked my way up through college, And we moved to Huntsville, Alabama, my husband and I. And I actually started in human resources, got a job as a contracting clerk, then became a contract specialist journeyman. And so, therefore, I worked my way up through that to become eventually a supervisory contracting officer with an unlimited warrant secret clearance. And so I worked on many programs. This just happened to be one of them, but I worked on ballistic missile defense. Huntsville Center is designated as the center of expertise in many programs for the Corps of Engineers because they can standardize the process around the country and really around the world. And so for the Ranges program that I blew the whistle on, they had the program manager who had been the program manager over that program for over 20 years. And so therefore you can imagine the type of ownership that he assumed, even though Congress and the Federal Acquisition Regulation, the FAR, which is kind of the contracting Bible, if you will, designates specific roles, and they do that intentionally to keep roles segmented so that there will not be that fraud and people staying in their lanes. And so for the
You're talking about the FAR as the Federal Acquisition Regulations, which lays out a unbelievably
yes,
detailed set of rules governing how procurement has to proceed. And many, as you're saying, many of those rules are designed specifically for the purpose of protecting against corruption. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to.
absolutely.
One of the things I do in these blogcasts is I translate government and other things for people. So a little bit of translation. Go ahead, Toni.
Absolutely. That's okay. I love it. And I love the casual atmosphere that you've
Oh,
laid
thanks.
out. So as I said, that's why we consider it the contracting Bible, if you will, because it's very specific and explicit. And so therefore you have revenue people, you have contracting, and then you have program management. And so the contracting officer has been designated the only person who can obligate the government for contracting dollars. However, that program for Ranges had not operated that way. And so when I became the new contracting officer and I took over that role, rightfully so, and held the program in compliance to the regulations that we were subjected to, of course, that did not go over well. We had multiple contractors and multiple contracts. However, it seemed to be that the contracts were only going to the same people all of the time. And this is not even allegations because we had an internal audit, an AR 15-6 investigation was substantiated all of these claims, all of my claims. And so the government estimates that are supposed to be prepared independently, somehow the proposals were within cents of one another, not even dollars apart, literally cents. So the contractor somehow had inside knowledge to what the government estimates were. They also had contractors who are not supposed to do inherently government work. And so we actually had, while we had a government contract program manager, there was a contractor, though, who really ran the program. And so when I
Yeah,
took over the program, of course,
that's a big no. That's supposed to be the dividing line
absolutely.
between contracting work and government work. So you found all these corrupt activities, wrongful activities, maybe not criminal activities, but unethical under the rules. So what did you do? Oop, Toni, do we still have you? I think we may have lost Toni. Stephen, maybe you can jump in and help us. What happened next?
Well, Toni did what you want federal employees to do, which was report these crooks. And a lot of this is criminal activity. This is misappropriation of funds, contracting fraud. If it was in the private sector, she worked, say, for a contractor, she could file a False Claims Act case. But the government often tends to cover up their own problems. And she reported it to the chain and was subjected to cruel punishment at work. Her case established the national precedent for hostile work environment within the federal government. There had never been a case before, and if you read the Whistleblower Protection Act that covers federal employees, it outlines very specific types of misconduct that you can file a case under. And hostile work environment isn't one of them. But there is a doctrine of interfering with the terms and conditions of your employment. So when this case was argued, we argued that when you put someone under psychological pressure, when you humiliate them, when you essentially cause them that they can't even return to work because it's so emotionally upsetting, you've made it so hostile, they should be able to sue for hostile work environment. So no, she wasn't subject, say, to sexual assault at the job, but she was subjected to whistleblower assault, the types of things they do to whistleblowers to punish them short of being fired. And then what happened when she couldn't return to work because of the pressure, then they fired her for being AWOL. She was able to win her case. Years and years of fighting. Precedent was made, and the case has now finally been resolved after over 10 years. But what she went through, no one should ever have to go through. And this is what whistleblowers face.
Yeah. Toni, do we have you back? There you are. We had lost you for just a minute. So
so.
tell me, let me jump you. Let me bring you back into the conversation to talk about your case. So you and Jane have been through horrible work circumstances where you did what you thought was the right thing, you did what I think was the right thing, and you were punished for it. So what would you say to others, Toni, who are finding themselves in this difficult situation, they're scared, they need their jobs, as I'm sure you needed your job, Jane needed her job. What would you say to them about taking that next step of stepping up with the information and saying, I've found something that's wrong here? What advice would you give them?
Okay, I hope you can hear me. I apologize.
We can.
I have an unstable connection. Great.
That's okay.
I had the other Kohn brother, Michael Kohn, as my attorney, and so and with support from the National Whistleblower Center. But what I would say is, it's always right to do right. You know, it's always good and a good time to do right. I know the persecution can be severe, retaliation can be just unrelenting, but you have to, and you also have to find a good support system. For me, I had my family. I'm also a minister, so I have my faith that I rely on, and I had my friends. And I had a great attorney in Michael Kohn, a great advocate who, along with the Whistleblower Center, because you don't start out thinking, oh, I'm going to be a whistleblower. No, you're just doing your job. And so when I actually attended the very first whistleblower luncheon event, that let me be surrounded by other people who had endured some of the same things that I had endured, because I felt so alone. I did not realize, I was just raised in a good home, and my parents taught me, you follow the rules, you be rewarded. So, even into my adulthood, I just did not expect for people to behave this way. Oftentimes, these are people that you have worked closely with, and as you know, you spend so much more time usually at work a lot of times. So I was around these people, and it just really was just it just took me aback as to how they could, when the money was involved, when actually it was power and greed. And so, you just have to find that good support system, a great attorney, and what Stephen has done in really coming in and specializing in whistleblowing has really made a difference around the world, because so many people have found themselves in this situation, and all we were doing was living life. I was coming up,
Right.
yes,
And
just
doing
trying
your
to just
job.
trying to
You're living
build a
life and
career for
doing
myself.
your job.
Doing
So
your job.
I want
Yes.
to come back to Siri, because you've set it up perfectly, Toni, to talk about the terrific work of the National Whistleblower Center. You both you and Jane did a great job of describing the role that your attorneys played, but also that the center played. And I want to give Siri a chance, since it is National Whistleblower Day, and the National Whistleblower Center has played a leadership role in making that a reality. Siri, I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about the work of the center that you run, and in particular, you have some, I would describe them as fairly pointed campaigns aimed at. You can describe them as either being aimed at particular issues. You could also describe them, and this would be how I would describe them, as being aimed at particular industries where you think whistleblowing is an especially important issue to be raised. Tell us a little bit about some of the campaigns that the National Whistleblower Center has underway right now and what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. Well, thank you for setting me up for an opportunity to share our work. I'm so proud of it. I really want to highlight some of the fundamental issues with whistleblowing that were noted today, which are that, the more true the accusations are, the more they are hitting to the core of the corruption, the more pushback you're going to get. And that's where we have our campaigns targeting. So we have campaigns that are targeting industries that do not want to be regulated. And that does include the US government, but it also includes companies that are impacting our climate, whether it be through pollution or through investment schemes that are giving investors the idea that they are investing in a green future when in fact they're not. We are also looking at issues around the tech industry and making sure that there's some accountability there. So we see there's a lot of hostile work environment issues in the tech industry. And, with the NDAs and all of these different sort of contracts that they get their employees in, we're really trying to counter that. And these are industries that are just asking for regulation and asking for accountability. And whistleblowers are reaching out to us and asking for our support. So we're doing everything we can to pitch in there. And we've made a lot of really good progress. Last year, we've really helped to beef up the existing reward programs, the SEC program, the CFTC program, but establishing the rewards for the anti-money laundering program has also helped weaponize whistleblowers against Russian oligarchs and stopping the funds from going into Ukraine. This has been
what you mean. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but explain what you mean by the rewards program. What do you mean by that?
So rewards programs are programs that are administered by the United States federal government that allow whistleblowers to report anonymously to these federal agencies that have enforcement power. And then when their tips result in a successful case that is above a certain threshold, right now that threshold is $1 million in most reward programs, they are eligible for a mandatory reward. In most programs, the standard range is from 10 to 30%. So these programs were established by the Dodd-Frank Act as in a first step, but then they are building out into other agencies with other laws. So the anti-money laundering law is under the Bank Secrecy Act and empowers the Treasury to give whistleblowers rewards. And then the False Claims Act was kind of like the model for that, but that's a little bit different because that empowers individuals to come forward in civil actions on behalf of the government, rather than through the government, through a federal agency's operations.
Sort of a private attorney general kind of arrangement. What you're describing instead is a system whereby the whistleblower tips off the federal government, and then the federal government takes it from there. They investigate and prosecute the case, rather than the individual taking on the case themselves.
Exactly. Yes.
I just want to jump in
Go ahead,
for
Steve.
a second to talk about the Whistleblower Center. So last year, They led a massive nationwide campaign to get this very effective whistleblower law on money laundering and bank secrecy. It is so massive. It is transnational. It covers 14,000 banks. And the banks are the ones with the responsibility to police it and have tremendous liability. And we fought resistance and resistance and resistance. And Siri led the charge for a full year, battling it out. And in the last bill passed by the last Congress, we got that put in after 200,000 people being contacted, at least 50,000 phone calls coming in. It was the largest grassroots wake up for a whistleblower law ever. We were told just 3 weeks before the law was passed it would never go through. And it went through with a massive show of public support. To be honest, we have no idea how big it was. We know we shut down congressional offices, we shut down Twitters, and it was just pretty wild. So when you say focused and narrow, when the time came, the Whistleblower Center rose and really delivered. This law will be one of the most important whistleblower laws for the next 25 years.
Well, that's fascinating. So let me ask. My experience with advocacy groups and also with lawyers is that you never feel like you're done. And so I've been working in the labor and employment field, of which I view whistleblower law as a part. I've been working in this field for 40 years, and I feel like I've been fighting a lot of the same battles for a very, very long time. So there is no such thing as achieving the goal. The only thing you can achieve is progress. So let me first ask, I'm going to ask each of you, do you feel like we are making progress in the field of whistleblower law, first? And second, what more needs to be done? Jane, let me start with you very quickly, and then I'm going to give Toni a chance, and then I'll give first then Siri and Stephen a chance to wrap it up. But Jane, are we making
Excellent.
progress in whistleblower law, and what more needs to be done?
Thank you, Seth. And very quickly, when Stephen started 40 years ago his career in whistleblowing, all those names I mentioned to you earlier were utilized. Through his efforts of his law firm, Kohn and Colapinto, Michael Kohn, David Colapinto, and through the National Whistleblower Center, which works hand in hand, and kudos to Siri about that, things have changed. Now they're called people of integrity, a person of integrity, prophets of truth. So that's a massive change. And the understanding, the psychological, psychosocial aspects of what happens to whistleblowers has now come into view. So there's just been a sea change. And I put that directly into the lap of Kohn and Colapinto, the National Whistleblower Center. They've established the Whistleblower Network News. We're encompassing whistleblowers. We're uniting them. And National Whistleblower Day only furthers that aim. Whistleblowers are coming together. They're making a change. Stephen, the National Whistleblower Center, works hand in hand with politicians to make these things happen. It's quite exciting because things are happening. They are really happening.
That's great, Jane. Toni, what do you think? Have we made progress on whistleblower law, and what's left to be done?
Okay, I hope I'm not redundant. As you know, I'm having some internet issues here, so I could not hear Jane. But one of the things I will say, as Stephen said, in our case, we had a precedent setting rule established by the MSPB board that for the first time, whistleblowers could have protections from a hostile work environment. So I believe that was very much progressive. We can build on that. I believe also having independent reviews for our agency that I was in at the time, they did not have anyone independently reviewing. So all of their EEO and legal all reported to the command structure. And so when you have that, those people who are now responsible for your performance appraisals, your promotions, they tend to look out for those interests rather than the employees. So where those structures may still be in place in agencies, I would highly recommend that they implement some type of independent review, a third party where employees can go to seek counsel who are not able to, who do not have to go to EEO officers who are inside of the agency and inside of that command structure. So those would be some things. Again, we had a very landmark decision in our case. It was MSPB precedent setting for the hostile work environment. So that was great progress. And I really like the point that you said, you don't ever feel that it's over. All you can do is keep making progress, keep trying to help others, and just hope that we can just continue to build to a more perfect union, as we say, even for our nation.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Okay, Siri, you're seemingly the newest person in this world, at least among your three colleagues here. Are we making progress? And what's left to be done?
We've made incredible progress. And I really have to say, thanks to National Whistleblower Center and our legacy, we've changed the culture around whistleblowing, and our changing the culture is going global. We have connections all around the world where we're able to support and encourage people to figure out how to apply these values and principles of protecting and supporting whistleblowers locally. So Steve just came back from a trip in Mexico. We have partners there. Michael Kohn just went to Venezuela. We have partners there. We've done speeches in various countries in Asia, and we just want to continue to expand. We have connections in Africa. So this communication is happening globally, and that's going to shift work for people all around the world. The United States is a leader in this. We have the best programs, and our programs do have global reach. And you can read more about that in Steve's book, Rules for Whistleblowers, which is an absolutely fantastic book to pick up if you're curious. So our National Whistleblower Day celebration really does champion those ideas that have been talked about in Congress for 10 years under the leadership of Senator Grassley. Our Senate resolution was issued earlier this month for the 10th time in a row. That is incredible, going from snitches and rats at the picnic to now regularly recognized demographic at Congress. But what still needs to change? I think we really need to look at the issues around hostile work environments in a way that everybody understands it impacts them. So one of the biggest questions I get from individuals is, what can I do to help support this cause? What can I do if I see someone who knows that they want to blow the whistle or something's going on? My answer is always that you might not necessarily know that someone has blown the whistle. You might not necessarily know what is going on behind the scenes. But when you see someone getting treated poorly at work, you have the power to decide whether you'll participate in the bullying or abstain from it. And usually this bullying happens because someone is speaking out about something that the person who's bullying them doesn't want to hear. It's never for a good reason. So we have to be hyper vigilant about how we interact with each other day to day. And that is something that no law can regulate. That is something that an individual can take responsibility for and help change the culture around safe workplaces. And unfortunately, what we're seeing in certain companies is that a hostile work environment is being normalized, and therefore so is the silencing of whistleblowing. And when we can't have whistleblowing discussed in a very civil way, we cannot change the law. But thank God we've been able to make some really good headway in changing the law, which ultimately will help more whistleblowers come forward anonymously so they won't be faced with the same sort of retaliation.
That's powerful, very powerful. So, Stephen, you get to bring us home. You've had 41 years in this business, and my guess is you've seen some things that would shock us all, but also you've seen some good things happen. So, you started us out in this blogcast by saying that you've seen a lot of progress. You started out litigating, there were no laws, and now there are seemingly dozens of laws, or at least a couple of dozen laws in this space. So I'm going to give you your answer on progress, although I want you to embellish it, add to it, but tell us what else you think needs to be done.
Sure. So the biggest change has been proving that whistleblowing works. And now most of the federal law enforcement agencies, Department of Justice, SEC, Commodities, IRS, they acknowledge that whistleblowers are the number one source of all fraud detection. The value of whistleblowing has been objectively demonstrated through academic studies, but also through systemic analysis of actual civil and criminal prosecutions, how they came about, who gave the information, and guess what? It's whistleblowers 80%. This is why the laws have improved. But what we know, they've improved in some areas, but in others they lag far behind, especially in the environment, in occupational safety, and even for federal employees. This is a work in progress. What do I see in the future? I see a continuation of what I call trench warfare. When we tried to get the AML fixed, anti-money laundering law,
There we
some
go.
just basic rights that needed to be affirmed, resistance. And we had to fight congressperson by congressperson to get that bill through. Why? The evidence was there, but the lobbying power of special interests is massive. And the only reason we can prevail and will prevail in the future is public support. That's where the Whistleblower Center comes in. It's about public support, or else our great experiment in whistleblowing will come to an end.
Well, that's incredibly helpful, very hopeful, although a cautionary optimism, I think I hear from all of you. Really appreciate your participating today and helping us to understand this important issue of whistleblowing. Let me close where I opened. Happy National Whistleblower Day. I think it is a happy National Whistleblower Day, although there's more work to do. So thanks all. Really appreciate it. Now, wasn't that just terrific? Four very courageous people fighting the good fight on behalf of workers and standing up to corporate power. We're eager for you to help us tell these stories. If you have a story that we should tell on these blogcasts, we want you to send us a note. Follow us on social media, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Threads, on Instagram. Send us a direct message, suggest a blogcast to us, and we want to take a look at it and see if we can put it together for you, because we want to tell you stories that you want to hear, and we're eager to have as many stories as we can possibly get about workers, worker power, and unions. We also are eager to have you follow us on social media at Power at Work Blog on Twitter, at Power at Work Blog on Instagram. We have a Power at Work page on LinkedIn. Follow us there. We are at Power at Work Blog on Threads as well. That's a great way for you to keep up to speed with what we're doing here on the blog, but also it's a way for you to communicate with us. And we want to hear from you. Tweet at us, thread at us, comment on our posts, send us direct messages. We'd love to hear from you. And then most importantly, you can subscribe. Go to the blog. You're on the blog right now, but when you're done with this blogcast, go ahead and go to the subscribe page. It's actually on the home page, and subscribe. Give us your email address, and we will send you updates every week about what's on the blog. We'll send you a newsletter about what's on the blog. We will also every Friday send you the weekly download. We go out and collect a couple of dozen important stories, studies, articles, think pieces, research pieces from all over the web, from some sources you may not think of, that we have been watching, monitoring closely throughout the course of our time operating this communications tool for you. We gather them up, we put them into the weekly download. We'll deliver it to your inbox if you subscribe to the blog. And if you don't subscribe to the blog, you can find it on either our LinkedIn page or you can find it right here on the blog. but subscribe so that we can stay in touch with you. And also it's a way for us to keep you engaged with the blog. Thanks so much for watching today. We will see you right here on the blog again very soon.